The role of the Terminator almost went to O.J. Simpson, but James Cameron didn't think he would be believable as a killer. The Terminator turns 40 years old this week, so here are some things I bet you never knew about it. The story behind the Terminator starts in Rome, Italy in 1982, when 28-year-old newbie director James Cameron got sick while promoting the release of his first feature, Piranha 2: The Spawning. Cameron had a fever dream about a metallic torso holding kitchen knives dragging itself away from an explosion. Yes, the Terminator was literally born of a James Cameron fever dream. That image stuck with James Cameron, and borrowing some inspiration from John Carpenter's Halloween, he drew an illustration of the metal being and then first set out to write the movie as a slasher film. His agent at the time hated the concept and suggested he work on something else. James Cameron subsequently fired that agent. Back in Los Angeles, Cameron re-examined the dream and instead approached it as a science fiction story. He was inspired by 1950s science fiction movies, The Outer Limits, The Driver, and Mad Max 2. Cameron enlisted his friend Bill Wisher, who actually has a cameo in the film, to help write it. Wisher was first tasked with writing the scenes involving Sarah Connor and the police department. But because Cameron and Wisher didn't live nearby, they did most of the collaborating over the phone and recorded their conversations. The initial concept included two Terminators being sent to the past, the T-800, and then a second one made of liquid metal that could not be destroyed with regular weapons. But Cameron realized the special effects technology at that time wouldn't be able to bring it to life, so he shelved the idea, eventually turning it into the T-1000 in Terminator 2. Cameron then received some offers from studios to buy the script, but none would let him direct it, because his directorial debut, Piranha 2, had bombed at the box office. So he turned to Gale Ann Hurd. Cameron and Hurd had worked together at Roger Corman's studio when they were first getting started, and in 1982, Hurd had just launched her production company. So Cameron sold Gale Ann Hurd the rights to make the Terminator for $1, under the agreement that he would get to direct it. Hurd made some edits to the script, and ended up getting a screenwriting credit on the movie, but James Cameron said she didn't actually do any writing on the project, and that he later regretted selling her the rights for $1, probably because he didn't have creative control over the future of the franchise. As he told the Toronto Sun in 2009, quote, "If I had a little time machine and I could only send back something the length of a tweet, it would be don't sell." Meanwhile, Bill Wisher ended up getting an additional dialogue credit. Cameron and Hurd knew some people at Orion Pictures who agreed to distribute the movie if they could find financial backing elsewhere. So Cameron sought out financier John Daly and his production company Hemdell Film Corporation, which was best known for producing The Who's Tommy. James Cameron came up with an elaborate scheme to impress Hemdale at the big pitch meeting. He hired his friend, actor Lance Henriksen, to come to the meeting as the Terminator. Cameron decked him out in a leather jacket, fake cuts on his face, and gold foil on his teeth, and then had him show up to the meeting early. Henriksen apparently kicked open the door and sat down among the Hemdale execs, fully in character. James Cameron then came in a few minutes later to give the full pitch. The Hemdale team was impressed and agreed to back the movie. The budget was set at a very modest $4 million. And Lance Henriksen was later cast as the detective in the film. So Orion wanted Arnold Schwarzenegger in the movie from the beginning. He had just had a big hit with Conan the Barbarian, but the studio didn't want him to play the Terminator, they wanted him to play the rebel, Kyle Reese. But James Cameron was skeptical of casting Arnold as Reese because he thought he'd then have to get an even bigger name to play the Terminator. Sly Stallone and Mel Gibson ended up turning down the Terminator role, at which point Orion suggested O.J. Simpson for the part, but Cameron thought he lacked a killer instinct. So James Cameron came up with a plan to ditch Arnold Schwarzenegger. He'd meet with him, pick a fight with Arnold, and then tell the producers that Arnold was a no-go. But when the two actually met, James Cameron was so taken by Arnold, he decided he'd be perfect for the Terminator. Schwarzenegger was skeptical of the movie throughout its production. He called it a shit movie in one interview, and later said he and the studio thought it wouldn't be anything other than a B action film. It wasn't until he saw the first 20 minutes of the first edit that he realized he was wrong. Arnold did 3 months of weapons training prior to shooting, and in total he has only 17 lines of dialogue in the film and speaks fewer than 100 words. James Cameron later said that Arnold's accent even worked in context. It had a strange, synthesized quality, like they hadn't gotten the voice thing quite worked out. For the role of Reese, Cameron and the studio considered Christopher Reeve, Matt Dillon, Kurt Russell, Treat Williams, Tommy Lee Jones, Scott Glenn, Michael O'Keefe, and Bruce Springsteen. Cameron even met with Sting, but Sting turned it down because Cameron was too much of an unknown. Michael Biehn got the part, but he too was skeptical of the film and thought it was silly. Biehn studied the Polish resistance in World War II to get into character. For the role of Sarah Connor, they considered Jennifer Jason Leigh, Melissa Sue Anderson, Rosanna Arquette, Leah Thompson, and Jessica Harper. Cameron offered the part to Lisa Langlois, but she turned it down because of the slugger's wife. So Cameron kept cast Linda Hamilton, who had just wrapped Children of the Corn. The Terminator was supposed to start shooting in early 1983 in Toronto, but Arnold Schwarzenegger was contractually obliged to shoot Conan the Destroyer, so Terminator was delayed. In the meantime, James Cameron wrote Rambo: First Blood Part 2, refined the Terminator script, and started discussing Aliens with its producers. Cameron and special effects supervisor Stan Winston then started designing the Terminator, which ended up looking almost identical to the character Cameron had dreamt up while sick in Rome. Winston hired a team of 7 artists who worked for 6 months to create a Terminator puppet, and further effects were done with stop-motion animation, including scenes featuring the Terminator's exoskeleton. Filming finally began in March 1984 in Los Angeles, and it was mostly filmed at night, which led to tight daily deadlines as they tried to wrap each day before sunrise. Unfortunately, Linda Hamilton sprained her ankle weeks before they started shooting, so all of her running scenes were moved to the end of the schedule. Her ankle had to be taped up every day, and she spent most of the shoot in pain. James Cameron found that because of Arnold Schwarzenegger's big presence on set, he had to rein in the tone of the film. He told the British Film Institute, scenes that were just purely horrific couldn't be because now they were too flamboyant. Arnold did not want to say the Terminator's now famous line, "I'll be back." He wanted to change it to "I will be back" because he had trouble saying "I'll" due to his accent. James Cameron refused, the line became legend, and Arnold had to say it many, many more times throughout his career. To create continuity between Arnold's performance and the stop-motion model, James Cameron had Arnold walk with a limp after being injured, which made him look more like the movement that the model could do. And they did have to do some pickup shoots after production wrapped, including the final scene of the movie where Sarah is driving down the highway. That was apparently done without a permit, and when a police officer confronted Cameron and Heard while they were shooting, they convinced the cop that they were making a student film for UCLA. By the end of production, the budget had grown to $6.5 million total, which is about $19.6 million today, which is pretty impressive considering blockbusters today usually cost hundreds of millions of dollars. Heard and Cameron then hired Brad Fiedel to compose the movie's score. Heard was skeptical of Fiedel at first because his only experience was in TV. He composed and performed the score on synthesizers, and his Terminator theme is in a highly unusual 13/16 time signature after he was messing around with some rhythms and accidentally made an incomplete loop on his sequencer. Orion had very little faith in the movie and thought it would be trashed by critics and fail at the box office. It seems Orion wasn't even going to show it to critics at all ahead of release, but the actor's agents convinced the studio otherwise, so Orion scheduled 1 press screening. The Terminator then opened on 1,005 screens on October 26, 1984. It grossed $4 million opening weekend domestic, landing at number 1, and it would go on to gross $78 million worldwide total, which is pretty good considering its budget was $6.5 million. Orion was half right about the critics. At the time, critical reaction was mixed. It got positive reviews from Variety, Time, and the LA Times, but the New York Times and the Chicago Tribune were less kind, criticizing its B-movie elements. In the aftermath of its release, writer Harlan Ellison claimed Cameron plagiarized his story and Outer Limits episode Soldier, which was about a future soldier who gets sent back in time to the present day. Ellison threatened to sue Orion, and they settled out of court for an undisclosed amount of money and an acknowledgement credit on future prints of the film. James Cameron was opposed to Orion settling with Ellison, but he was told if he didn't stand down, he'd have to pay the damages of a copyright lawsuit. The Terminator would of course grow into a beloved classic movie. Today, 100% of the 71 reviews assessed by Rotten Tomatoes are positive. The Terminator was named number 22 on AFI's Greatest Villains list, while it named I'll Be Back as the 37th greatest movie quote. In 2005, Total Film named it the 72nd best movie ever made, and in 2008, it was added to the National Film Registry in the Library of Congress. The Terminator spawned a major franchise that now includes 5 sequel films, a live-action TV series, an animated series, and 2 web series. It's also been adapted into novels, comic books, and a number of video games. While there are no firm movie reboot plans at the moment, it feels like more Terminator movies are inevitable, though both Arnold Schwarzenegger and Linda Hamilton have said they're done with it. In February, Hamilton told Business Insider she felt she had done all she could in the franchise and that the story had been done to death. And she even questioned the idea of a reboot, saying, "Why anybody would relaunch it is a mystery to me." And yet, the sci-fi world that started as a Roman fever dream still looms large in the culture.